Qlik back again. Unlike most times when I show stuff usually visually, what I'm going to do today is basically build an app from scratch. We're going to start brand new. All I'm going to do is press create here. I'm going to create this brand new, really uniquely defined app called Starting from Scratch. It's going to open up and say, Dalton, what you need is some data. Like, I can't visualize things for you without data. I might go in and take the easy button here. If I have security permissions, I could access predefined connections. These are already sources that have been defined and governed by somebody else. I might have access to some data sources like a SQL server where the connection information and passwords are already there. I'm only going to get the tables that I should get. I might have predefined connections for REST connectors to Salesforce information or other sources. If I have permissions, I can create new connections on my own. Maybe I want to go out and connect to my Teradata Aster system and go build things. Maybe I want to start something new with Salesforce. Maybe I want a new REST connector to go pull data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe I go to our Qlik data market and pull predefined data sets that have already been curated and governed and locked down. Things like weather data that you might need access to, or currencies, things like that. I could press and go right into the script editor and just start doing things at the script level. That's generally what I do. I'm not going to do that today because I know that's not the kind of thing that you may be doing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to end up bringing in a spreadsheet. I want to show you what's in that spreadsheet first. Basically, this is healthcare-ish type data where I'm going to simulate several different tables. I've got orders, and I've got a specialty table, and I've got provider groups, and I've got payers, and I've got patients and providers. And basically this table would be something where you've got a normalized view where I've got all these IDs, and I need to go get those dimensions. These theoretically could be on any number of data sources. I could be pulling some of this from SQL, some from Excel. I could be pulling some of this information from Hadoop if I wanted to end up tracking like lab result values or things that I've got gajillions of records over history. So I wanted to just show you quickly what that data set would look like. What I'm going to do here is I'm simply going to drag or drop that file into the application. So I'm going to drag that Excel sheet in, and here's what Qlik's going to do for me. It's going to save me some time and say, hey, I notice you've got 6 different tables out there. At this point, these things are just completely separate entities as far as Qlik's concerned. There is no association between these things. I'm not doing left joins or right joins or any kind of joins. They're just separate entities. What I would need to do is associate them somehow based on some field name. And so as a database administrator and the guy who curated this set, I might say, hey, well, geez, I know that patients have orders. And Qlik is intelligent enough to say, hey, you know what? You've got a medical record number here, and you got a medical record number there. I'm going to guess you would like to associate those 2 tables based on that field, right? I could say, nah, that's not what I meant at all. And I could come in here and I could try to say, nah, I really want to join a quantity field to the medical record number or a provider group ID, or I can create a custom association. And this is how I might be able to select a multi-field concatenation if I've got many-to-manys in my cardinality. I'm going to go ahead and accept that one, though. That was absolutely right. I could go through the same. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to say, hey, for this self-service type person who might be joining this data together, we may be just going through a wizard. All I simply want to do is let the wizard pick this. And it automatically says, hey, I've got provider group ID, I've got provider group ID, I've got a specialty ID and a specialty ID, and I've got a payer ID and a payer ID, and you're thinking, oh, come on, this is so set up. There's no way in the world every data set just happens to have fields lined up so Qlik's associative model can work, and you're absolutely right. In fact, in this case, I did something that is unlike anything humans do. We have an expression, you can't compare apples to oranges. Well, humans can't, but Qlik does. Qlik is actually doing a data discovery by walking the columns of data, not just looking at field names, and says, hey, I believe this is how these two tables should be associated together. And I say, wow, that's awesome. I appreciate that. As a human or a secretary or business analyst, you might have missed this. As you start pulling these cloud-based sources and mixing them with your flat files and mixing them with databases, these things may not always line up. Qlik helps get that association in place. All I'm going to do at this point now is say, hey, go ahead and load that data for me. It's going to read all the data from these 6 different tables. Again, this could have come from anywhere. I simply brought it all from one spreadsheet simply to demonstrate this. What I'm going to do now is go into take a look at these tables, and I can see I've still got these 6 separate tables. If I wanted to look at just orders, I would see the fields for orders. One of the things I want to point out, you notice we had a procedure date field. What Qlik does automatically behind the scenes for me is it does some other associations for common things. I could have a procedure date. I want to see the date. That's what was in my data source. But come on, that's silly. I need to just look at year. All I want to look at is year. No. I meant I want to look at the year and the month. And so Qlik automatically builds those things out for me. I could have things like that. I would have something like a payer ID that came from my payer table. Well, in my payer table, I have that ID as well, but I also had a definition. And what the associative model does is I could pick a number, something out of my orders table, and I can show the correct payer. I know what payer was associated. Or I could pick the payer I'm choosing to use, and I would see the payer ID. And if I started lumping these things together, like, hey, I want to see the orders, and I want to see the order ID here, and I want to see the quantity. If I were to pick any one of these, it comes across, and here's the orders that were associated with that payer ID, and here's the orders that were not associated with that payer ID. It's just that Qlik associative model in action. Well, let's go ahead and get started. That's just kind of the basics. We're trying to keep this pretty quick. What I want to talk about more is the governed metrics. I want to be able to build a drill down. Ooh, we need drill downs. And so what I'm going to show is I'm going to start with something like the payer group. So I need a provider group. I'm going to create a drill down. I want the provider group, and then I want the provider name. And ooh, you know what? Maybe I'd like to go all the way down to the medical record number for the patient, or maybe just show the patient's name. And so I can go ahead and say, hey, I'd like to see this. And we're going to call this a provider group drill. I can provide as much description and metadata for this as I need to. This is how we roll. Whatever my metadata description is, how I created this. I can create tags like this has to do with providers. This also has to do with patients, etc., etc. And all I do is I build that. Well, gosh, that's one way to do it. That's looking at it from provider way, but maybe I want to also create another drill that would be starting at my payer group level. And I want to go from a payer down into the patient, only this time I'm going to show the patient's name instead of the MRN number or something. And this one I can call payer group drill. And again, I can give it as much metadata, any tags that I want to do. I can create that dimension. We're going to pretend that we're done here. We're going to do some things in our app that would be very common. I want to see probably number of orders. How many orders am I looking at? I could look at that order ID and simply get a count of it. And so we could build these measures out and say, this is my number of orders. Again, I can give it descriptions. I might want to give this color. So every time I use orders somewhere for a KPI or a table, I get this color. in there. We're not going to do any of that. I'm just simply going to create that. And I also want to know number of patients, right? And so if I look at these MRNs, I could do a count. Now here's where the rubber starts meeting the road. If everything were simply as easy as just, hey, let the little wizard pick and choose, we wouldn't need developers and coders. But the truth is, when I talk about these measures, yeah, I'm building them on the fly now. These would be things that I would, as a developer, build, govern, and then publish out for apps. Because in this case, I know I've got a bunch of orders for the same MRN. I don't want to count each row. I want to get a unique count. And so I can do that, and I can say this is my number of patients. Now, with any of this, I could just use number of orders, number of patients. I could use these things just as KPIs like that if I want to do that. We're going to go ahead and build some charts though. I want to say, hey, I want to build a bar chart, and maybe my dimension here is the provider group drill. And now here's the nice thing. Once I've built these measures, and again, I built them for you on the fly to show you how easy it is, even kind of a startup from scratch, these things would be governed and they'd just be published to apps to subscribe to. I can say, hey, I'd like to see how many orders I had. And I might also then turn around and say, geez, come on, I'd rather see this horizontally. And of course, I want to see the numbers on the chart. And I build this, and I would like to drill down into this. Well, now I can drill into the two different providers, and maybe I want to drill down to the patients, and I can see that these patients have 2 orders each. These patients have 1 order each. Here's one of the neat things that I can do. This is the way I would build this chart. Well, what if I want to build a second chart to show me the payers version instead of the provider version? Well, I could use up a lot of real estate for that. The nice thing is the ability for Qlik to be able to do alternatives. And so now I've already using the provider group drill. I'd like to have an alternative where I could see the payer group drill instead. And you know what? Instead of counting orders here, I'd also like an alternative so that I could see number of patients instead. So this is looking at by number of orders. This was by the provider. If I were to get rid of these, okay, maybe that end user doesn't have the ability to edit. And they want to be able to say, come on, I want to see it by payer instead. And now I don't want to see number of orders. I'd like to see number of patients instead. And so these metrics and these dimensions we can build, the charts are super flexible for the end users so that they can just pick or choose these alternatives. I could build out 15, 20 versions of these with KPIs, or I can let the end user kind of have that flexibility. So hopefully in just a short amount of time, you've seen how we can bring data together. Qlik's wizard can associate and help end users, even just self-service users, associate that data together, and then how we can build out dimensions and measures from that in a very quick way. Those things would be then governed, which I'll cover in a separate video, and just read into application. So if I decided I want to change how I count patients or change how I counted orders, and there's more complex rules, those things can be done. Hope you've enjoyed it.